Well, I've got a little more I want to tell you about Edgy before he becomes, uh, before I just get telling him about what he does. I mean, this is quite an introduction he's getting, but he deserves it. He's going to be a pretty major player throughout this novel. His name, Edgy. That's not his real name. His real name is Ed, just plain Ed. But in the Peace Corps, the Brazilians couldn't end a word with a d, like a ed. They always called him Edge. It was just has to do with Brazilian Portuguese, and it kind of caught on. That's so his friends. I mean, his legal name is Ed, E-D. It's not Edmund, and I'll say something about that in a moment. But it's just Ed. But anyway, we're going to call him Edgy because that's what the Catole 6, 5 besides him. Well, he himself called him that too because he thought it was kind of cute. Brazilians couldn't or didn't say it like that. Now the Mundo part, I asked him. I told you that maybe someday I'd ask him about it, and I did. You know, how could somebody of Irish extraction have the last name Mundo? And he came up with this story about the black Irish, that that he was as Irish as could be on his mother's side, but somewhere back there, at the time of the Spanish Armada, there were some castaways from Spain, and one of them was a Mundo, and that's where he got that Mundo. Then after he told me that whole story, he said, and that's all a myth. The truth was they just didn't know. He didn't know, but that was his name, Ed Mundo. So those are two things I want to tell you about. The other thing I wanted to say is he wears glasses bigger than you would think would be necessary, and fairly thick lenses. And he's worn them all his life. But as he's getting older, I mean, he's always been very nearsighted since he was like I don't know, school age in junior high school, maybe they called it back then. But as he's been aging, his vision's actually been getting a little better on that score. But he was saying that he found out. I knew this too because back in the 1960s, I'd heard a man named Buckminster Fuller. You've probably not heard of him. Buckminster Fuller. He was very respected in the 1960s. This is the time of the Whole Earth Catalog, and I think it was in the Whole Earth Catalog that I read about him. A grandson, I think, of Margaret Fuller. I may be making this up. And Margaret Fuller was one of those Massachusetts Brahmins, I think they called them. One of the participants in Springfield Farm, I think it was called. Famous in her own right for that, but not as famous as her grandson, Buckminster Fuller. Now, I may have made that all up, but what I'm remembering is that Buckminster Fuller once was asked about how it was that he saw things so differently. I think he had a lot to do with the development of the geodetic dome. Again, I may be making this all up. But he said he thought it was because his eyesight was so bad, and it always had been, and that gave him an advantage. He didn't look at the world the way other people looked at the world, and he thought that gave him an advantage. And Edgy once he wasn't one to blow his own horn, but he said maybe that's why he seemed to be so different, because his eyesight had always been different. Well, anyway, it's time that they welcomed him into the house. They sat down for lunch, and we'll pick up the story now.